Hi everyone. For this week's class, we're going to start by using as a springboard a video. It's called Yeshiva Guy Says Over a Vort. It's an exchange between two fictional cartoon characters talking about whether or not the Avos kept the whole Torah. So we're going to watch that, and then we're going to continue to discuss this idea in general as the Ramban tackles it in this week's Parsha.
Can I say over a vort that I heard by my Rebbe's house last Shabbos?
Sure.
The pasuk says that Yaakov gave Esav bread and lentil stew. Esav only asked for the lentils. Why did Yaakov give him bread as well?
Because lentil stew tastes good with bread.
No. The Gemara brings down a machlokus about whether the correct bracha on lentils is shed hakol or mezonos. The best way to avoid any problems is to wash on bread. Therefore, Yaakov gave Esav the bread, so he would wash, and not worry about which bracha to make.
I must be hallucinating, but I could swear that I just heard you say that Yaakov knew about a Gemara in Maseches Brachos.
What's the problem? The sages tell us that the Avos knew, and kept Kol HaTorah Kula.
You're telling me that Yaakov observed all of the mitzvos in the Torah?
Of course.
The Torah commands us to sheko lulav and esrog sukkos. Did Yaakov sheko lulav and esrog sukkos?
Of course.
The Torah commands us to remember what Amalek did to the Israelites in the desert. Did Yaakov fulfill that command as well?
Of course. Yaakov knew the future, and therefore knew that Amalek would attack the Israelites in the desert.
Okay. Even if he did, how can Yaakov remember something that didn't happen yet? Did he have some sort of time-space bending machine?
In fact, I have a great vort about whether Yaakov said Zaker or Zaker when he learned Parsha Zakar. Do you want to hear it?
Please. Please, no. I'm afraid that might induce some sort of stroke. The Torah commands us to write a Sefer Torah. Did Yaakov observe that commandment?
Of course.
So why didn't he just take out his Sefer Torah and read it to find out that his son Yosef was alive, and avoid all that heartache? Better yet, why didn't he break up the plot of the brothers before they tried to kill Yosef? Did he forget what he wrote? Or was he just playing along? When God commanded Yaakov not to eat from the Jid-Hanashek, why didn't Yaakov tell God, "Hey, I already knew that. It says so right here in this Torah I wrote. Do you think I am some sort of idiot?" Okay, let's make believe none of these problems exist, and in fact Yaakov, with the help of his time-space bending machine, kept all of the commandments in the Torah.
I'm glad you came around.
The commandment to wash one's hands before bread was instituted by the rabbis centuries after the giving of the Torah as a safeguard against eating teruma while ritually impure. Why would Yaakov follow a safeguard instituted by the rabbis?
The sages tell us that the Avos even kept rabbinic commandments.
Did the Avos wear Crocs on Tisha B'Av?
No. Rev Eliashib said that Crocs are too comfortable. He wore Converse.
If Yaakov knew the entire Torah, why didn't he know the correct bracha for lentils? Why didn't he know which two of the opinions in Maseches Brachos was correct? Do you know that there are many Rishonim who believed that the Avos did not observe the entire Torah?
Did they all go to YU? They must not be part of our Messorah.
Is it your Messorah to pick only the most fantastical, irrational sources from the vastness of Jewish tradition, and call anything else kfira?
Sounds about right.
So is the brown bear totally unfounded when he suggests that the Avos kept the whole Torah? Where is he coming from?
Well, we were told that they did.
Sorry?
We were told that they did.
We were told that they did, right. So the pink bear mentioned at the end of the video that actually many Rishonim disagree with this concept. They don't think that the Avos actually kept the entire Torah, but nevertheless there are some that do. And the Ramban is going to be one of them, and something that I'd like to explore this evening. I think with it, I think we haven't answered a lot of those questions, but also we have a better understanding.
There's a lot of inconsistencies.
How so?
I mean, well, we're told that the Avos kept the entire Torah, and then we're told that Yaakov married two sisters. We're told, well, the Torah wasn't given yet.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So it's not an issue. Mm-hmm. Right. Which is a conflict in that they kept the whole Torah.
So the Ramban will bring that up. That's one of his questions.
Is it possible that they knew the laws rather than, was there a separation that they knew the laws? Like
Knowledge versus
that,
fulfillment.
and not their future? Is it possible that they didn't know that?
So what the pink bear mentioned was that, it's funny we called it pink bear, the brown bear, that there is a mitzvah in the Torah to write a Sefer Torah.
Yes.
So with that, if you're going to take this to its extreme
but did
end,
they write it just with the laws and the mitzvot,
so perhaps,
and not the rest?
I mean, by our rules, that wouldn't be a Sefer Torah.
That's right.
Right?
Yes,
So,
but at that time there wasn't one. So would
Right.
have that been
So that's
considered
a
one
possibility.
at that time?
could be.
That's a
There's a difference between
Yeah.
knowing the mitzvahs and fulfilling the
That's
mitzvahs.
Uh-huh.
So to
So
say
what
that
the sources that the brown bear and the Rashi and the Ramban are going to be building off of are Gemaras that actually seem to indicate that they actually did them, not just knew them. So
the discussion becomes, for lack of a better word, really quite ludicrous. And the next question is, of course, which you've answered for us, which Brown Bear answers for us, where they have what Karaim.
Oh, Torah Shabbat Peh, right?
Well, so
Mitzvahs
the answer,
D'Rabbanan.
no, they knew Torah Shabbat Peh. It goes beyond. When you talk about Mitzvah D'Rabbanan, that
Right.
goes on for hundreds of years afterwards.
Yeah.
You're talking about Gemara and Mishnah Gemara.
If anything, Torah Shabbat Peh would be easier to accept that
Torah
than Torah
Shabbat
Shabbat
Peh
Peh.
is part of Torah Shabbat Peh.
Right.
It's inseparable.
Right.
So they come together. But to talk about the Takanot Rabbanan,
Right. So then
that's
it's another thing.
what become.
Did Avram Avinu light his
What
menorah around
did he do in the
Hanukkah?
7th year? What did he have to eat?
What did he have to eat?
Of course, we
Just
had,
like
we had
what
the
a
bracha.
Klaus
I
had
guess
to
he
eat.
had the bracha on the 6th year for 2 years. So exactly what it says.
So-
but
Anyways, the reason why this topic is discussed in the 6th Parsha, and that's what we're going to get to, so it's the following reason. If you look in the first source, I think we'll explore what Rashi and the Ramban have to say. So the context is, it's the beginning of Perek Chavav in Parshas Toldos. So the context is that Yitzchak is heading on his way out of Eretz Yisrael because there is a famine, like his father Abraham did. When things are going tough, you get out of there for a little bit to get a source of food, a source of income, whatever it is that we're talking about. And nevertheless, Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Yitzchak, in this situation, don't listen to, don't pay attention to the famine. Stick around here, live in Gerar, where Avimelech is, and don't worry about the famine. Even though your father Abraham went, you don't have to go. Chazal say that Yitzchak was an Ola Tamima. He was in a certain way unadulterated with regards to the impurity of Chutz La'aretz. He never had to leave Israel. He's somebody that we view as pure in that sense. But the reason why he didn't go in this situation is because God specifically told him to. He promises him everything's going to be fine if you stay here. But most importantly, the last pasuk, pasuk Hey. So it says, the reason why I'm saving you. Actually, let's go back to pasuk Daled first. I'm going to, despite this famine, increase your offspring. They'll be like the stars of the sky. And your children are going to be widespread throughout the land, and they're going to be blessed among all the nations of the world. And then the next pasuk, the reason why this is going to happen for you is because your father Abraham, he listened to my voice. So that's one element. V'yishmor mishmarti, he guarded my precepts, mitzvosai, also my commandments, chukosai, my chukos, v'sorosai, my Torahs. So the reason why we're going to have this discussion here about the Avos keeping the Torah is because the Torah doesn't generally mince words. So when we have this last pasuk here, that in the merit of Abraham's having kept these seemingly 5 items, right? It sounds like they're all different. They're all addressing different things in some way. Because just to say that they're all referring to the same thing would mean the Torah could have kept it at just a couple of fewer words, and we would have been fine. So the Rishonim, they deal with what these different terms mean. And with that, we come into this whole discussion of the Avos keeping the Torah. So it's just interesting, before we go further, the Sforno happens to comment that what's going on here is, if you notice, Yitzchak is being told that he's going to be saved in the merit of Abraham Avinu, Yitzchak's father, not because Yitzchak himself is a tzaddik or anything like that. The Sforno suggests that the reason why is because if you look throughout the Parshios, and the Akedah is something to talk about for sure, but throughout the Parshios, Yitzchak hasn't done anything yet on his own. Yitzchak hasn't even done what Abraham says of, calling out in God's name and perhaps spreading God's message. That's not something that happens yet. And in some ways, the Sforno says this is God's Musar speech to Yitzchak Avinu, saying, you haven't done anything yet. Your merit in being saved currently is only because of your father Abraham. And at that point forward, the Sforno points out, that's when you see Yitzchak starting to do more, and getting more involved in perhaps outreach or whatever it is that made the Avos so special.
It's a tiny bit peculiar, because he did put his life on the line willingly.
So it is interesting how some Rishonim would maybe suggest he didn't, but generally it's assumed that Yitzchak did. Yeah. Well, that's not mainstream. But Ibn Ezra happens to say that Yitzchak Avinu was he didn't know what was going on until he was bound up. Anyways, that's.
Don't we have Medrash that he specifically asked to be bound tight?
That's true. The Medrash and Chazal, and that's why I'm saying mainstream would assume that Yitzchak definitely was voluntary in this effort.
Can we say, based on this pasuk, that's why the Ramban chastises Abraham from leaving Eretz Canaan because of the famine? Because you see from Yitzchak, he did prosper.
If anything, one could suggest the opposite also, right? Here you have a direct command from God saying, don't go. To our knowledge, we don't have any direct command to Abraham not to go down to Mitzrayim. So it could be he did have permission. For whatever reason, Yitzchak had different circumstances that God felt that he should not go. But
the Ramban criticizes Abraham.
Right. We mentioned in the first class in Parshas Lech Lecha that the Ramban thinks Abraham Avinu did an Aveira by going down to Mitzrayim during a time of famine instead of having bitachon and staying put.
He says the quality Yitzchak shares with his son Esau, right? Neither of them left Eretz Israel.
Esau never left Eretz Israel? Interesting. Right, I don't think we have any account of it, at least.
No, he didn't. It's one of the things that we had in common.
Very nice. Okay, so anyways, but more essentially what we're going to focus on is this last pasuk here. So pasuk Hey seems to say all these items, these different things that Avraham Avinu did. What we have is shmiros, right? First, the listening to God, Shama Avraham Bekoli, listening. Shmiros, mitzvos, chukos, and toros. Those are all different categories that we have to define. So first off the bat is Rashi, and this is the most well-known. This is where perhaps the brown bear is coming from in the video. So Rashi says, Shema Avraham Bekoli, that Avraham listened to my voice. Rashi explains that means Kishasani so when I tested him. For example, the test of Akedas Yitzchak and the other tests that we mentioned Avraham having gone through. V'yishmar mishmarti, and he kept my charge. Gezeros l'harchaka al azharos shebatorah. These are the decrees that were meant to distance a person from violating one of the negative commandments of the Torah. Kagon, for example, shnios la'arayos u'shvus l'Shabbos. For example, the mitzvos derabanan of Shabbos, or more distant relatives that are similar to the relatives that we're not allowed to marry from the Torah's perspective. But basically, Rashi is saying the mitzvos derabanan that are meant to safeguard the mitzvos deraisa. So Rashi says this means here that Avram was super careful. He even kept those mitzvos derabanan. Mitzvosai, my commandments, dvarim she'ilu lo nichtavu, the matters which, even if they hadn't been written, ru'uyin him lehitztavos, they would nevertheless be fit to be commanded and followed. Kagon gezel shvichas damim, like theft and murder, things like that, which are called the mitzvos siklios, the mitzvos that perhaps a person could rationally come to on his own. So Avraham kept those as well. Chukosai, my decrees, dvarim she'yetzer hara v'umos ha'olam mashtivan aleim. The matters which the Yetzer Hara and the nations of the world they ask questions upon. Kagon achilas chazir, for example, the eating of pig. Ulevisha shatnei is wearing a wool and linen garment. She'in tam badavar. There's no reasoning behind these mitzvahs that we know of, at least in the most rational sense. El gezeros hamelech v'kukosav al havadav. They're just decrees of the king and laws that we have to follow. So that's what chukos are, and that's generally assumed to be what chukos are. And then the last category is sorosai and my toros. What does that mean? Lahavi Torah Shabbal Peh. Tish Avram also knew Torah Shabbal Peh, Halacha Moshe Misinai, and the laws that are orally transmitted through Moshe that we don't have any allusion to in the text or anything like that. So Rashi here is assuming that the Avos kept the entire Torah, and just has, it would seem just as we do today. Right? We have the mitzvos derabanan he mentions, chukos, the mitzvos siklios, Torah Shabbal Peh, basically the entire body of knowledge that we have. Now, as we know, there's issues here, right? The pink bear noted many of them. This is a hard pshat to follow. What do you think Rashi's motivation was in choosing this path, in explaining what this pasuk means, as opposed to maybe a different approach? What would be a motivation of going the more difficult routes in trying to explain what this means, and when you'll have so many questions on such an approach?
I assume that it's provocative.
Provocative, actually just trying to gain our attention. Nowadays, the opposite approach is provocative.
He has various places where he talks about the learning. We talk about Yaakov goes to learn Yeshiva Shem. What's he going to learn? We'd already did 4 Parshot by then. What's he got to learn? Clearly, he has to invent. He has to teach us what there was to learn. This is what we had to learn. I mean, that's the question which we learn.
Learning in Shem V'Ever, though, that's not in the Torah explicitly either.
That's Rashi.
Right.
So he's consistent. That's the first question you ask.
So why not abandon that whole approach?
What did he go to learn?
Yeah.
So it's all part of a consistent philosophy which he's expressing. That Abraham went beyond Shivat Mishlat Ninoch, because until then that's all we know existed in theory that had been given.
But then if that's all we have at this point, so wouldn't it make so much more sense to say?
Is that the basis on which Abraham is unique? What is it? What distinguishes him from everybody else?
I think
we have the same Shivat Mishlat Ninoch. So he goes clear, because that didn't require him to believe in God. He did. So there's something different. So what does this... Perhaps this is part of his reward, that he's already given insight into human mitzvot, so that he gets, again, we get all of this, again, if we go back to Ramban taught us that everything is so give him something to do. We are going to need the merit in the future generations. Give Avraham something to do. Give him a manner in which to follow. So that he's got to collect brownie points, not big points.
These are categories of activities that he kept them all as they were at this particular time, but they were dynamic and evolved over time.
I think for many of these, you could argue they were zilch at this point in time. The idea of Torah Shabbat Peh, what's a Torah to begin with? Right? The idea of Gezeros Midarabanan, right? Shabbos, these concepts having existed in any form. It's we don't know. We assume historically things started at Sinai. So to say that, but I think...
we say Yaakov Tikei Mariv, Yitzchak Tikei Mincha, so what did Abraham have? He don't have Shachri. So how does he daven Mincha Mariv?
You mentioned something very important, though, I think. It's what we're trying to do, perhaps, by bringing such an approach, that even though it might be harder to work out, you'll have a lot of questions on such an idea. If you want to make the Avos, first of all, relevant to us, and to show to what degree they're special, more than the Umos HaOlam, or particularly why they're on maybe equal footing to us nowadays, it's important to say that they in some way did what we did. Right? If a person doesn't have this idea, they could perhaps, you don't necessarily have to come to this direction, but a person could say, the Avos, who were they? They didn't even have Torah mitzvahs. What do I care about what happened in their lives? Why did they have any influence on me? They didn't have Pran Film. They didn't have all the challenges I have in my Avodas Hashem. They lived in a different world. So it could be perhaps the motivation towards saying that the Avos were involved in keeping the Torah, as we do, is to make things more relevant, perhaps, to allow us to connect more. It's just a suggestion. But that's what Rashi says, that the Avos did keep the whole Torah. And that's what Ramban is going to build his commentary off of, and that's really where all the Parshanim get involved, and they basically express their shita with regards to this idea that the Avos kept the Torah. So we'll take a look at the Ramban. So first he starts V'yishmor mishmarti, Lashon Rashi. I didn't go on to quote it here as we just saw Rashi inside. And then he begins to analyze it. So he says, V'im kain, if this is so, in fact, like what Rashi says, that the Avos kept the entire Torah, Yeh kol zeh bonei al das shehaya Avram mekayim u'meshamer es haTorah. Right, Rashi's statement seems to make assumptions that the Avos, like we said, have kept all the Torah, ad shelo nitna, even though it hadn't yet been given. The Kach Amru, but nevertheless, this has precedent. This was said in Bereshis Rabbah. It's the Medrash of Chazal. The pasuk Vayitin Lahem Yosef Agalos. If you can have a lot of sources, where Medrash talks about, for example, Yosef when he sent message to his father telling him he's alive, he's in Egypt, telling Yaakov to come up or to come down. He sent wagons, agalos, and Chazal explain what was being alluded to from those agalos, those wagons. Sheperish mimenu. The Parshas Egla Arufa. Yosef was trying to hint to the fact that he learned with his father Yaakov the day before he was kidnapped by his brothers and sent away to Egypt, the topic of Egla Arufa, the cow that the Zakanim will bring forth, and they'll kill it if there's an undiscovered murder in their vicinity. It's a whole topic in the Parsha. We're not going to get into exactly what happens there, but Yosef this Medrash says that Yosef was learning this piece of Torah with his father prior to leaving to Egypt, and he wanted to hint to his father, I remember what we learned still. And he sent agalos, which play on word Egla Arufa, agalos, they sound similar, that's what Yosef was hinting to. But anyways, you see from that Medrash the idea that they were apparently learning. They were learning topics in Torah that we would think they didn't have yet. Okay. Shayosek b'Torah k'shehim shahayu avosav. he learned Torah just like his forefathers did, Yosef. Even though now the Torah had not yet been given, and we have our pasuk here saying that, yeah, Abraham did keep the Torah, he learned, he did all these things. And if you look at that medrash, you look at it more at length, it even says that they kept the most specific, exacting details about all these mitzvahs, and that they taught it to their children. So, the Ramban basically shows that Rashi has precedent. There is an idea.
This is what this lady said, is that we're talking actually about laws. We're not talking about events.
Right, so far laws, right? It doesn't say that Yosef alluded to the fact that him and his father, they just learned about how the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Right, so far all we have is laws, and I think if you look in the words of Chazal, I think it would support that idea. It seems like laws are the only things that we talk about the Avos being involved in, right? But keep in mind here, so we're going to have two issues. The Ramban is really going to make a split. We have the words of Chazal, which Rashi throws into the pasuk here to work to deal with, that the Avos kept the whole Torah. But then moreover, this is separate, not necessarily, but possibly separate. This pasuk itself that we're focusing on might not necessarily be referring to this fact. So is it true that the Avos kept the Torah or not? That's one issue. And then even if they did, is this pasuk referring to that phenomenon? Right? So we're going to have possibly two issues to make a split with. Anyway, so the Ramban continues. So he says, "V'yesh l'shol." One can ask questions on this approach. Imkein eich hikim Yaakov matzeva. How did Yaakov Avinu erect an altar, a pillar, as they say? V'nasa shtei achayos, and he married two sisters. These are all things that the Torah says are aser. It's interesting that the Ramban he's tackling this issue from the perspective of how do you internally resolve the issues that I know the Avos did such and such activities, which the Torah itself forbids. Right? He's not saying the questions that the pink bear had is, how did he have a Sefer Torah? How did he know the future? What's going on? He's trying to, I think, address this from maybe the more, rooted in the text problems. You know, the other problems we're going to have to deal with also. And I think he does allude to the solution. But right now his questions are, the Avos seem to have violated many of the mitzvahs. If you look through the stories of the Torah, they made pillars, they married sisters, and even according to the wisdom of our sages, Arba, that not only did Yaakov marry two sisters, he married four sisters. According to Chazal, the other two imahos, Bilhah and Zilpah, they were half sisters to Rachel and Leah. So even more so, Yaakov married sisters. But Amram Nasa Dodaso, Amram Moshe Rabbeinu's father, he married an aunt. That's not something that's permitted. But Moshe Rabbeinu he came shtei masei matzeva. Moshe himself actually erected 12 pillars at Har Sinai. How on earth could these individuals have violated the Torah, which apparently Avraham kept and he taught to them? Right? Avraham apparently, according to Rashi, according to Chazal, is getting a lot of credit from Hashem for having kept these mitzvahs. And this is a quote from Parshas Vayera. Avraham himself gets credit from God. God says, I have to tell Avraham about the destruction of Sodom because Avraham, he's so good. He instructs his family members about these mitzvahs and things that the ways of God. So it's hard to say that Avraham, was a master of chinuch, that he taught these to his generation, to the next generation, and kept on getting passed on. Yet nobody actually kept it. That would be hard to say. Uvi Yaakov darshu. With Yaakov Avinu himself, we can't possibly say that Yaakov himself didn't keep the Torah, but Avraham did, because Chazal say with regards to Yaakov, Sheshamar es HaShabbos v'kavat chumin. Yaakov himself, he kept Shabbos. He even established Shabbos boundaries as to how far he can go and maybe allow himself to travel more distances. But basically, he fulfilled mitzvos derabanan with regards to Shabbos. So Yaakov himself also kept the Torah. It could be that Shabbos is different though, and Yaakov didn't necessarily keep the entire Torah. Shabbos maybe is different. Even if you want to say the Avos didn't keep the entire Torah, perhaps we could say that they kept all of Shabbos, because Shabbos is considered such a tremendous mitzvah that it's equal to the entire Torah. It's such a foundation that it addresses that God created the world. So it's important to notice, not in the Ramban per se, but if you look at the various Midrashim of Chazal, I don't think you have anywhere explicitly where it says that the Avos kept the entire Torah. It says that Avraham did, but not necessarily future generations. But the Ramban is saying, even if the words of Chazal don't seem to indicate explicitly that, if we're talking about Avraham having kept all the mitzvahs, and the Psukim tell us that Avraham passed on what he did to future generations, it stands to reason that everybody coming after him also should have kept it. So we have our questions here. We have pillars that the Avos put up. We have marrying sisters, and then other questions that are more related to Amram. Perhaps Amram's a later generation, so we don't have to be as worried about him. But it's become almost a pastime in works of Rabbanim in later years to try to figure out why exactly the Avos were allowed to do this and that. There's entire Sfarim that are written about this topic. But among many of the commentaries, one of them, the Maharsha, he answers for the sisters' question. How could Yaakov marry sisters? That their sisters really, they were converts to Judaism, so to speak. They weren't Jewish. Only the Avos themselves were, I guess, even in some sense Jewish. To marry these women, the Maharsha says they had to undergo a conversion somehow. And when people convert, they're no longer considered blood relatives, with regards to the halakha at least. So the Maharsha says, marrying sisters, no problem. They're not really considered sisters anymore. It's an interesting approach. But even then, I would think that perhaps it's not a satisfactory answer, because from the rabbinical perspective, there's a rabbinical mitzvah that essentially we treat blood relatives, even when they convert, as if they are related. A person would not be allowed to marry two sisters if they're both converts. We wouldn't say that. We'd say that they should still be viewed as sisters, midar rabbanan, and not be married. So anyways, there's a lot of approaches here. The Ramban's going to give one approach, but there's a rich amount of reading you should know out there with regards to this topic. So anyways, the Ramban gives us an approach. He suggests, how exactly could the Avos have kept the entire Torah? So he says, Ulai Nemar, perhaps here's how you should understand the pasuk. It says, Mishmarti, what are these, my charge that God says Avram kept? Shnios la'arayos shel b'nei Noach. Perhaps that's referring to the second degree of the marriages which the b'nei Noach weren't allowed to marry. Notice how he's saying b'nei Noach, right? The Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, those are things that did exist already. So the Ramban is saying perhaps on that level he kept, so to speak, mitzvahs derabanan, or extra safeguards with regards to the mitzvahs of b'nei Noach. Umitzvosai, my commandments, gezel shvichus damim, that's theft and murder. Avram didn't do those. Chukosai, my decrees, aver men hachai, that's eating the limb off of a live animal. Ukilayim, shel harvas behema, harkavas ilan. And perhaps it's referring to mixing species and planting and mixing species of animals. That's a little bit more complicated, but the Ramban is assuming that that's within the purview of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, that even non-Jews are not allowed to graft trees and mix breeds of animals. But anyways, the Ramban is assuming that that's the case. V'sorosai, and my Torahs, my laws, dinan v'yisrei avodah zarah. That's with regards to civil laws, the prohibition against worshipping avodah zarah. These are all the mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Who hashomer ha'oser ratzon boro u'mishamer afilu dekdukein v'chumnus b'mitzvah shelahem. Avram Avinu and everyone that came after him that he was teaching to these lessons to would keep all the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach and do so with all of their details, with all of their stringencies. K'moshe ezkiru avodah zarah shel Avram Avinu arba meya pirkei havos. There's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that interestingly says Avram Avinu's Maseches Avodah Zarah. We have in our Talmud Bavli, our Babylonian Talmud, we have a Maseches Avodah Zarah. I'm learning it in my kollel right now, actually, and it's comprised of a number of chapters, but not anywhere near. How many are they saying here? 400. So there's a Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says Avraham's Maseches Avodah Zarah, so to speak, whatever that means. It was 400 chapters, right? So the Ramban wants to say that that's alluding to something. The concept, perhaps, that basically the Avos kept the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach really, really well, and they looked into these matters so carefully that they were able to expand on them so much that you could have 400 chapters of Avodah Zarah, and it could lead to somehow keeping all of the 613 mitzvahs. Not to say that the Bnei Noach themselves kept the 613 mitzvahs that they were obligated to. There's only 7, but the Avos themselves, if they were to really think long and hard about the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach and elaborate on them and try to expand on them, they could have gotten to a point where they basically had 613 mitzvahs to keep. So that's one approach as to how the Avos got there. Right? There's really two questions. It's first of all, how did they keep the Torah if we seem to have so many examples where they violated it? And then the second question is, how did they do it? Right? Let's say they did keep the Torah. What exactly did they get into their hands? What exactly did they get into their minds to reach that stage of knowing to observe the 613 mitzvahs? So this approach here seems to be saying that it was kind of it was an approach that they got to using their seichel, using their wisdom. They really thought long and hard about things, and they got to this point. So the Ramban continues, "V'darshu b'mei ha'sha'arim." There's a drash, Chazal expound out of a verse that says that Yitzchak Avinu, he brought in Mea Sha'arim, 100, how do they translate it? 100-fold of produce that year. Why are we bringing that up? Why are we bringing up how many he got? So Chazal say, Shemadadu ala Maisos. He measured them out to separate Trumos and Maisos with them. So what does that mean? That's a mitzvah, right? That's not something that the Bnei Noach had to do. So he points out, Ki hayu ha'avos nidivei amim laseis Maisos la'aniyim. The avos, they got to the point where intellectually they realized that it's a nice thing to give charity. It's a nice thing to support others. So either to support the poor, or l'konei Hashem, or to the priests of God. And who were the priests of God at that time? Could go in Shem Ve'ever v'Talmideim. You could say Shem Ve'ever, the people in learning and their students. K'inyan v'hu kohen lakel elyon. Like we say in the psukim themselves in Parshas Lech Lecha, that Malki Tzedek, he's viewed as the priest of the God up high. Right, that we're saying that there was such a concept apparently of Kohanim even in that time, and whoever the Kohanim were at that time, Avram Avinu gave Maisos to, and Yitzchak also gave Maisos to the people in his time. But anyways, what the Ramban is saying in this paragraph here is that expanding on the Sheva Mitzvos B'nai Noach, that's how they got to this point. So that's one approach. There's another approach here, and this is going to be the one that the Ramban says is the Hanira Elai. This is the one that appears to me. This is the one that I think is the emes. So Midas Rabbeinu Shalom and Avram Avinu HaTorah Kula Beruach HaKodesh. Right? Here's I think perhaps maybe the more accepted view of how the Avos could have kept the Torah. They got it through Ruach HaKodesh. They got it through divine inspiration. That God just told them outright, here's the Torah, these are the laws, and this is what you should follow, and they knew what to do at that point. They were told over the mitzvahs, and they worked through the various concepts they were given and the secrets within them. They kept them all as people who weren't commanded in these mitzvahs, but nevertheless did them. Okay, so that's the second pathway of perhaps how the Avos could have gotten there. But now the Ramban brings in an important idea, which answers a lot of the questions we had earlier, of how did the Avos actually keep these mitzvahs, if we see that there are so many examples of where they seem to have violated them. So he says, Ramban says that the Avos only kept the mitzvahs themselves in Eretz Yisrael, not throughout the rest of the world. And you look, when did Yaakov marry two sisters? He did it in Chutz La'aretz, by Lavan. Also Amram, when Amram married his aunt, that was in Mitzrayim. Ki ha-mitzvos mishpat Elokei ha'aretzein. The mitzvos, they are the laws of the God of the land. That there is something special about Eretz Yisrael with regards to Shmiras HaMitzvos. Even though certainly for us, we have to observe all the mitzvahs even if we're outside of Eretz Yisrael. You wouldn't be able to suggest that we're not obligated in them. But Chazal themselves hinted to this matter in a midrash later. I'll bring your attention to this later on with the help of God. There's a Ramban to Parshas Vayikra where he talks about this. Maybe we'll get there. At some point we get to Parshas Vayikra. The idea that Eretz Yisrael is special with regards to mitzvahs, not with regards to observance for us nowadays, but with regards to the fact that God uniquely rules over Eretz Yisrael, as opposed to in other lands where God almost, so to speak, to whatever extent we could say this, delegates his authority to angels that look over every nation. So the idea could be, and Ramban elaborates on it there, that in Eretz Yisrael specifically, God is, looking down at the land without any intermediary, so to speak. Obviously, God sees everything. There's nothing that we're going to get by Him. But the idea that there's certainly a special idea towards keeping the mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael specifically, that applies to us. That perhaps it's nicer to do mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael than here, but we're obligated in all of them. Whereas the Avos, perhaps the Ramban says, didn't have to keep the mitzvahs in Eretz Yisrael. Okay, but v'hamatzeva. What about the pillars that they erected? Mitzvah sheniskad shebizman yaduahi. The prohibition against creating pillars, creating altars, besides the ones in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, those were isurim that had a specific time frame to them. Kamosha darshu. It's like what Chazal said in Sifri, Ba'asher sana Hashem Elokecha. When it's the pasuk that says, "Don't make a matzeva, don't make these pillars, these altars, don't make those that God hates." And that's what the pasuk says, and Chazal learned from that. Sesina akar hayosa ahuva bimei ha'avos. That God hated them after the time of the Avos. That the reason why they became forbidden is because the other nations of the world, they had started using these for their avodah zarah, and because of that, God had such a repulsion from them at that point in time. But the implication is, before that time, the Avos could do it, earlier generations could do it, and it wasn't an isser. I think with that, I think you have maybe a solution to some of the pink bear's questions. Right? What was the issue? One of the issues was, did he write a Sefer Torah? Did the Avos write a Sefer Torah? If they did, shouldn't they know everything that happened? Right? Or what were some of the other questions we had? Anybody remember? Mechemes Amalek, for example.
The two sisters, didn't he know that he was going to marry the two sisters, Yaakov?
So I don't know if that was brought up in the video, but the Ramban brought that up.
How did he know where Yosef was?
Right, how did he know where Yosef was? If he had a Torah, he would have known the whole script, so to speak.
Well, we already answered that. We said that it was just the mitzvot that they learned, not the actual story, not the actual text.
But an issue you have there is, if there's a mitzvah itself, there's a commandment, a halacha,
Yes,
that a person's supposed to write a Sefer Torah.
Yes.
So then that would mean... Right. So I think with here you have a little bit of an opening. I think the Ramban points out this idea, like just like a matzeva is something which is not... it could have been built during the times of the Avos, prior to when it became so repugnant to God, because it was used for Avodah Zarah. Similarly, I think you could say that there are certain... Even though the mitzvahs are binding forever, for all generations, for us... certain historical events brought things into place, and until those historical events brought them into place, the mitzvahs didn't exist yet, perhaps, just like the matzeva. There's no prohibition in those earlier times of making a matzeva. I think similarly a person could argue, at a time before Mechemes Amalek, there's nothing to remember about Amalek. They didn't even exist yet. Before the Torah's storyline actually developed, there's no Torah to write.
There's a problem with it, because you end up picking and choosing, because we were told that it was Pesach when the angels came to Abraham.
I was thinking about that. What do you do there? There's some of the midrashim that allude to these ideas. One of them, a perfect example. Right. So we assume that eating matzah is a mitzvah that is because of the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story. Right. So if that didn't happen yet, how on earth could you eat matzah on Pesach? Right. If we're dealing with the Avos, right? So how would we pick?
That's not the intention, because people ate flat bread, unleavened bread. But the question is, why does the Midrash say that it was Pesach?
Yeah.
That's
that
actually
it was
the question.
Pesach. The concept that it was Pesach.
Yeah.
How could you have Pesach before you had Mitzrayim?
He sent Sarah in to make the matzah.
So that's a tough question. I'm not really sure what to do with that. It's true. Like, it seems that there are some midrashim of Chazal that would seem to indicate even the mitzvahs which seem to be based on historical occurrences that hadn't occurred yet.
Because we have in the Torah mitzvahs that are given. That are not to be observed until a timely fashion. The mitzvahs of Eretz Yisrael, when they're in the Midbar, specifically are when you get to the land,
right,
you will do this and do this and do that. Right. That is to say, you're not doing it over these 40 years.
And even earlier than those 40 years also, you could say perhaps they didn't have to do it then.
That's the point, is that if the Torah can put a time frame, we like to think of the mitzvahs as being eternal, but actually they're not, because the Torah does put a time frame on some of them. They start here. It doesn't put an end time on it, by the way.
I'll show you an idea that I think might address this. It's a Torah that I'm not particularly sure is correct, but there's an idea. People say this on at the Seder, that I forget what the exact language is, but there seems to be an indication. And I think when we talk about the four sons, that we keep that because God, how is it? Because God made somehow an indication that the reason we have Yetzias Mitzrayim is because we eat matzah, not the other way around. It's not that we eat matzah because of the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim, but that God, so to speak, wanted to create a mitzvah of matzah. So what did He do? He created events in the world by which the whole story could unfold, by which it makes sense to us now as to why we eat matzah. So I think the Beis HaLevi is the one that says it, but. I think he draws upon it from the idea of histakal ba'oraisa uvara alma, the concept that God, this is also a saying by Chazal, God looked in the Torah and created the world. And what does that mean? It seems to be that the ideas of the Torah itself, in some ways, existed even prior to the occurrences by which maybe the mitzvahs we assume are based off of. That it's actually the opposite. That we have mitzvahs in the Torah God saw. There's mitzvah to eat matzah. How am I going to make this make sense? So then he said, let me create historical events by which making matzah will seem like an understandable mitzvah.
It's really sanctifying matzah. The idea that matzah was made as connected to the Egyptian, we hold that it was being eaten in Egypt as the poor man's bread as well. You know, there are many nations. Matzah is a very basic food. You know, it's not a unique food to us.
So I'm not sure what you're saying.
is sanctified through Pesach. It becomes a particularly holy thing. But there are people eating matzah in Iraq. There are people eating matzah in Persia.
Meaning, when we talk about Avram Avinu eating matzah on Pesach, we would say that was like just happenstance. He happened to have been eating matzah that day.
No, what's important about it is that Chazal say this happened on Pesach, and he made matzah at that time. That's what's important about it. The idea that people were eating matzah, and what is matzah? Matzah is flour and water. That's not leavened. Right? It was not an uncommon food. It was a very portable food. It was a food that people ate.
But what would be the intent of Chazal by communicating that message? If we're just saying basically matzah is like any other food that people sometimes eat.
No, what I'm saying is Yetzias Mitzrayim sanctifies matzah and gives it a meaning that it didn't have.
So then retroactively we're going to give meaning to what they happen to have been eating earlier in the times of the Avos?
Yeah. Well, that's the whole question. Is that why do they say it?
Don't we think that the calendar has a kedusha to it? So at the time of Yetzias Mitzrayim, there's a kedusha of that time period. There's a kedusha of Rosh Hashanah.
Correct.
It doesn't. It overrides the actual having obligation to.
So in a mystical sense, I think we could understand this, right? And that's what Ramban. That's what Ramban was referring to. He said that there was through Ruach HaKodesh, the Avos got this, that perhaps they also were in tune to what was going on in the air at that time of year, even though the events hadn't taken place yet. You could say that in some way, whatever was in the air during the time where we actually had Gulas Mitzrayim, years before that story actually happened, it was in the air then too, just not actualized by an actual storyline of people leaving
when
Egypt.
Abraham left Egypt with Sarah.
When did he?
What time of year did
I don't know if we have any record of it.
See, just to fortify that opinion, the zodiac has certain signs in it. So certainly the stars were made before man was created, right? You agree to that? So there's a certain kedusha about the times of the year, and we bring it up like the ram, right? The ram is the time of Pesach. Right. How does that relate? How does that relate to Gemini? How does Gemini relate
right, we have
to
a concept by which we assume that this was something that's in the time cycle, even outside of the storyline that we build our holidays and things off of.
Yeah.
So it could be that that's the way we should go about these things. And when we talk about, when the Ramban talks about Chazal saying that the Avos had Ruach HaKodesh, and by that they got to all these mitzvahs, it could be that in a just totally mystical way, beyond our grasp, they did, in fact, know about these holidays, about these mitzvahs, but you have the difficulty of, if that's the case, then that means they knew the future, they knew all the developments that would happen. You think they would have done something about it, like in the cartoon. Why didn't Yaakov stop the brothers from selling Yosef, from trying to kill Yosef?
We're going to watch a Star Trek movie next time.
Discuss the idea that sometimes God blots out or puts a jamming signal on their Ruach HaKodesh.
Could be. Right, that's another possibility. Like even though we say that Yaakov Avinu had Ruach HaKodesh, he didn't have any awareness that Yosef was alive. He didn't have any awareness that Yosef had been kidnapped apparently by his brothers.
His father didn't tell him.
Right, his father didn't. Right, his father Yitzchak did know. Rashi says, and didn't tell Yaakov because for some reason in the grand scheme of things, Yaakov wasn't meant to know.
Yeah.
Is it also the freedom of choice, and this is why because it would change history?
Right. If you ever see the Back to the Future movies,
this is a Star Trek.
You can't mess with the time stream in any way. Could be something like that as well. These are all things that are hard to digest, right?
They were given this rule along with the mitzvahs: don't mess with the future.
So it's important to realize, there are other approaches out there, of course. That's what the Pink Bear alluded to. If you look at pretty much all the other Rishonim in the Mikros Gedolos Chumash on this verse, they said it in a much more regular way. Avos didn't keep the Torah, nothing to worry about. But if Avos did, you're going to have to get into these kind of discussions. You're going to have to say things like this.
And isn't it Hashem's hand in all this that he's kind of like the director of the play? And the reason why the 2 wives or 4 wives is because at that time we had to marry within our people and not with the
for them it was a necessity.
Yes, and so that's why at that time frame it was okay to marry because we had to multiply.
There is a concept that I think somewhat agrees with that approach. The Maharal says that the Avos, when we say that the Avos kept the mitzvahs, they kept all the mitzvahs aseh. the mitzvahs, the positive mitzvahs, not the negative commandments. And the reason being because the Maharal says there were certain things that the Avos had to do historically to get certain things going into motion that required the violation of certain Yisurim. So the Maharal says he knew, Yaakov Avinu knew he had to create the Shvatim. He had to do something by which Klal Yisrael could be built in a tremendous way, and to do that, Yaakov had to marry sisters.
I mean,
so the violation was okay for that.
The difficulty with it is Rashi's absolute position that they kept everything, rabbinic everything. This is actually the idea that they kept Torah. I think it's something that we're all empirically comfortable
Ramban
with.
doesn't deal with whether they kept the ones after him. They kept all of the Torah, all of the mitzvot, all of the midrabanan. He simply says it's applicable only within Israel. That's what he's saying here.
That's one limit. So the Ramban said, first of all, the mitzvahs didn't apply to them outside of Eretz Yisrael.
That doesn't solve the problem. It does.
It does for Ramban because he doesn't accept Rashi's position.
So for some of them, the marrying sisters thing, it solves.
Sisters,
but like we mentioned, eating matzah on Pesach.
What
do we do with that?
Were they lighting menorah?
Right. Lighting a menorah, it's a derabbanan. Yeah, that could be something to talk about too.
The idea then he brings up the idea that there's certain mitzvot that were not yet relevant. They were timely and time dependent.
I haven't noticed.
That's
not.
If you say it's absolute, right?
Rashi says it's absolute. Ramban does not. So he's setting a set of limits. Set of limits is one is the start times were delayed. Some of them.
Is he saying that?
Ramban says
the Ramban's certainly putting some limits on this concept, right? They didn't keep it outside of Eretz Yisrael, for example, as one of them.
Right.
Are there more limitations? So one of them also that he mentions is with regards to a matzeva, with regards to making a pillar, an altar. The Ramban said there are certain mitzvahs that, even though they exist for us, in concept they weren't a mitzvah that would be binding at that time. Right. So I think you could say that for some things. Right. The matzah medrash is a very difficult one to work with, even with that.
Can the matzah not be because we're keeping laws, and that's
it's
like
Pesach.
a law?
Why is it? There's no Pesach. Pesach is for reasons, and those reasons are time dependent.
Right, but the difficulty with that is that Pesach is a holiday that's based off of a story that didn't happen yet. We have to start giving more complicated answers.
Can I tell you? Do the angels eat matzah?
The angels don't eat.
Not a question.
There's a halacha that there's a certain number of hours before Pesach where you're not allowed to eat matzah.
Right.
Right?
Uh-huh.
But when the angels went to Lot, they ate matzah because you're allowed to eat matzah Pesach night. But there's at the first quarter of the hour, the first quarter of the day, you're not allowed to eat. You're allowed to eat matzah, but from then until Pesach, you're not allowed to eat matzah.
So you're saying they were
There's a halacha. That's why
you're observing.
Angels don't eat, period.
Right?
I think we just have a few more minutes. We can talk about this more afterwards. I just want to be able to get to the sources first.
They look like they're eating, but they're really not eating.
Right, Rashi commented they pretended.
But it's not a question of that at all. He was making matzah because it was Pesach. That's the issue. Right?
Yeah.
That's
You're going to say something?
It's not what they ate it.
Related question. So you can't
He's
put up a
making
pillar.
it. How could it
to set a
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Sorry?
The number of hours from the quarter of the day to Pesach.
I don't think so. When we mean a matzeva, I think we mean specifically a pillar by which you would use worship, sacrifice, and the like on it. All right, so we'll talk more about this after.
That's the halacha about matzah. That's a halacha of matzah. So that's what the halacha is.
So you're going to
let's finish this first, yeah? Let's finish these sources. So Ramban will then go with another approach, one more. But anyways, Uvi Yosef Darshu, just to finish off that paragraph, Uvi Yosef Darshu with regards to Yosef, when we said earlier, Shahari Meshameres HaShabbos Hafilu B'Mitzrayim. There's a medrash that says Yosef kept Shabbos even in Egypt. So the Ramban, he has an issue there. If he says the Avos only kept the Torah outside of Egypt, outside of only in Eretz Yisrael, so Mitzrayim is outside of Eretz Yisrael, and you see Yosef still keeping Shabbos. So he says that's not a problem. Shabbos is something which is equal to all the other mitzvahs in some way, because it is a testimony towards the creation of the world. Yosef did this to teach his children to have faith in the concept that there's a single God that created the whole world, in order to remove from the hearts of his children the false philosophy of the Egyptians, which they were, growing up among. And that's the kavanah of that medrash. It could be that some mitzvahs were kept even outside of Israel. The Ramban entertains. Perhaps Shabbos would be one of them. But anyways, what we have here is the concept that the Ramban is basically saying in that paragraph, the Avos Tu Ruach HaKodesh knew to keep all the mitzvahs. And to whatever extent we need to understand, to answer certain questions, we're going to have limitations on that concept. So that's the Ramban's take on it.
It's all the relevant mitzvahs.
All the relevant ones.
Yeah.
Oh, perhaps. But anyway, so now in the last paragraph he says, he's going to say, now according to Pshat, here's the following. Now, what would you do with this? First he said an answer of, V'li nira, it seems to me. I mean, this is my opinion. And then he says, al derech hapshat, though. This is the way to explain this pasuk. So there were two possibilities. First of all, it's important to realize truth, historical accuracy, is not necessarily the same thing as pshat, right? When we talk about what actually happened back then, that might not necessarily be the same thing as the simple reading of the pasuk. Right? We very ordinarily equate the term pshat as truth. Like, come on, what's the pshat in this Gemara? Like, what is this Gemara actually trying to tell me? What does it actually mean? Has truth, when really, with regards to that lethal learning psukim, the term of pshat doesn't necessarily mean truth necessarily. We have varying levels of truth within the Torah, the shiv and panim of the Torah. So when the Ramban here says the pshat of this pasuk is as follows, that's not to go against what he said earlier, which he thinks is his true opinion of whether or not the Avos kept the Torah. So that's one possibility. And the second possibility, I thought, is Al derech hapshat here might be referring to the pasuk itself. Like we said earlier, there's two different issues. There's how to read this pasuk, these various things that Avram Avinu did, but then there's the greater topic of, by the way, Chazal make all these statements that the Avos seem to have kept the Torah. Right? They don't necessarily go hand in hand. Rashi plugs that idea of Chazal into this verse, but you don't necessarily have to take it in that direction. I think the Ramban, he gave us his opinion, perhaps, about to what extent the Avos kept the Torah, and now he's telling you, by the way, what does this pasuk mean? Nothing to do with the Avos keeping the Torah. And then he says as follows. So, mishmarti, my charge, what that means is emunus ha'elahus she'amin b'shem ha'miyuchad v'shamar mishmeres zu b'lvad. That's Abraham having a certain sense of emunah in God, and that he kept, he guarded that philosophy within his heart. And that Abraham also, he got into arguments with the people that worshipped the Avodah Zarah. He pointed out how foolish what they were doing was. And Abraham also called out to God to do, so to speak, outreach. He brought people close to worshipping God. So that's all within Mishmarti, my charge. Mitzvosai, my command, that's also in the pasuk. He says that's referring to Kechol Asher Tzivahu B'lech Lecha Me'artzecha. This is with regards to all the commandments, specifically not in the term like mitzvahs like we use it, but commands by God. Like when when God told Abraham, go leave your land, Ba'olas Bana, or to Akedas Yitzchak, Ugerishas Ha'ama V'Espana, and for example, telling Hagar and her son to leave. Chukosai, my decrees, Laleches B'darchei Hashem Liyos Chanun V'Rachum V'Osit Tzedakah U'Mishpat. That was Abraham imitating the ways of God, of being somebody that was gracious, merciful, and somebody that was a righteous person that did justice, and that he commanded his children and their children to follow in those ways. V'sorosai, and my laws, hamila ba'atmo, that's bris milah, that was the law specifically that God gave to Avram Avinu, uvanav, and for his children to have a milah, va'avadav, and for his slaves to have a milah, umitzvos b'nei Noach kulan, and all the mitzvos of the b'nei Noach, shehin Torah lahem. That was their Torah. It's interesting. That meaning, that last statement of a Torah Sai is the Shulchan Aruch of those times. That's what Avram kept, and that's what's being referred to in that Torah Sai part. Not necessarily all the mitzvahs that we have, but all the, so to speak, mitzvahs, the things that were binding upon them at that time. That's what Torah Sai is referring to in this pasuk. So the Ramban gives you a pshat-oriented approach to this pasuk as well, despite going through all the ideas of how to understand the Avos keeping all the mitzvahs or not. Many of the other Rishonim in Mikros Gedolos, if you look, they say this approach as well. They basically explain the pasuk to say it's not referring to the 613 mitzvahs, it's referring to various details within Avram's personal avodas Hashem that was applicable to him in his time then.